Welcome once again to the Rock and Roll Research Podcast. I am Matt Valley, and I share the super cool side gigs and past lives of the market researchers and insights pros that you've come to trust. So today I am really excited to welcome Randy Hill to the program. Welcome, Randy.
Hey, Matt. Happy to
All
be here.
right.
Thanks.
I'm really happy to have you here. So Randy is based in Dallas, Texas, as am I, and he is in Global Brand Insights at Cargill. And we met a few years ago, I think, in that capacity up there at the Cargill headquarters in Minneapolis. Later on, we got to talking, and I learned that Randy is a fellow drummer just like me. But but Randy really, really went for it. I mean, really went for it. If you think about in the 80s, where was the place to be if you were a drummer? It was LA, right? So, so Randy's got a story to tell, and I'm really excited to hear that one. So yeah, welcome once again, Randy.
Oh, thanks, Matt. Yeah, and hopefully, there won't be too many secrets that I don't want my kids necessarily to know about on this one. But no, just pleasure to be here. Thanks, appreciate it.
That's up to you, Randy. It's your show. So. All right. Let's get started. So let's start with your career and insights. Tell us how you got here, and go for it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's probably a lot like others. I don't think we wake up right. We woke up at 6 years old and said, you know what, I want to be a statistician, or something like that. I'm kind of always been a bit of a scientist at heart, whether, I was looking up at the stars through telescopes or binoculars or, cracking open rocks, kind of seeing what's inside. I've always been interested in what's in there and how did it get there? And it's not unlike insights. What's inside a stakeholder or consumer's head? How did it get there? How do we inform it? How do we change it? How do we modify? How do we help them understand sort of our perspectives and things like that. So I went into the Air Force right out of high school from 81 to 85, and I got married in 83. And through that, just kind of growing and those kinds of things, I was playing in some bands up in North Dakota and things like that. But we moved to Los Angeles in October of 1987. I was in ad sales, and we would get these media kits, these with charts and stuff on it to help us when we're selling our ads, like to just be a better salesperson. I'm more informed, so when I'm talking to potential advertisers and clients, I can tell them about our readership.
Sure.
But to be honest, I was really more interested in those charts, right? Mm-hmm. Again, it kind of goes to the scientist in me. I was like, well, I mean, that's all really cool that I can tell my clients about the readership, but I'm really more interested in how did they do that? So that was my first kind of introduction to the concept of using data and analytics and insights and things. And so that was, 33 years ago, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then if you fast forward 10 years later, I'm at a company, I'm a QA analyst in customer relations, and I was really starting to use data for like process improvement and customer sat improvement, things like that. I went back to school in my early 30s. I got my BBA in marketing at 36, and I got my MBA at 40. So,
Awesome.
I was kind of kicking around, doing quite a few different things. But, using data for decision making, kind of, just starting to coalesce all of those ideas, probably pushing 30 years ago, 26, 27 years ago. When I was in school, I learned that I loved stats. I had no idea, right? I mean, I was scared to death in my first stats class. And you kind of go, well, this is kind of cool. And then business calculus, all these things started really like coming to me in a way I didn't know about. Never been exposed to it, in the sort of traditional sense of stats.
Sure.
So I got into my first market research class during my BBA program, and I I had been doing quite a bit of analysis at that time, but just more and more getting deeper into market research. And then, I just told my wife one day, I said, I'm just kind of kicking around. This seems like it could be a good place to actually like make a living. This was probably, early to mid 90s. And so
Right.
I kind of made the switch, was working at a company sort of in customer relations, sort of in market research. And I got my very first market research analyst title probably in 95, 96, something like that. So I've spent
Nice.
about 17 or 18 years on the agency supplier side, and I guess 8 to 10 of that on the corporate side. So again, you can just see this crazy, you know, uh, sort of, one side of the road to the other, kind of in the ditch sometimes, trying to get to where I'm at. But I kind of landed in a career field that sort of fits the scientist, fits the strategist, that fits the analyst, all of those different things. It's been a really great living, and fits my personality really well.
Now it's a great story. I just love how you were able to navigate to this industry as sort of a third career, if you will.
Yeah, navigate's a really strong word. Kind of floating around in the ocean without a sail is, but but yeah, to some extent you just it's again it goes back to discovery,
Yeah,
right? Is you just as you live your life, if you're paying attention, right? There's these ways that you can just sort of allow things to wash over you. You discover, you sort of take that in, and it can really have a profound impact. And it's not unlike what we do with our clients, right?
yeah,
We kind of
yeah,
hope our insights wash over them and help their business, right? So
exactly.
it's been great.
Cool. So this is career three. Career one was the
Yeah,
military. The military.
yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
Yeah,
probably so. Yeah.
yeah.
And then
So
in between there, actually, out of the Air Force, I was managing a pizza restaurant. I was managing a Hastings record store in Houston. I
fun.
was in ad sales. It's crazy.
All right. So you talked about you glossed over the real story here that I want to talk about. Right. So post military, pre research, moving to LA. Come on, give us the details here.
Yeah, so it's interesting because when I went in the military, even in basic training, I was jamming with guys. Oh, you're a guitar player. Oh, great. So we go to the rec center, and we're just cranking out some Leonard Skinner or whatever. But when I went into
Freebird.
the
So
Freebird, yeah, right, exactly, yeah. So when I went up, I got stationed in Minot, North Dakota, and pretty much there's not much to do except work on planes and drink beer, right? And so I was in probably three or four bands of some kind, and sometimes all together. Um, one band one weekend, another band another weekend. Some of the guys in the shops, the guys that I worked with, were this guy's a keyboard player, this guy's a sax player, this guy's a guitarist. So we'd throw something together and do some country covers and local haunts up in all across North Dakota,
mhm.
sometimes even in Montana, and just a lot of fun. And then I also was at the same time in '84. There used to be a major entertainment group called Tops and Blue in the Air Force. I don't think they exist anymore. Pardon me, but um, TAC and MAC, which are air commands in the Air Force, had always been putting forth people for Tops and Blue auditions, but SAC, where I worked, the Strategic Air Command, never did. So in '84, um, there was a lady I had met who was the director of a small review, sort of almost like a vaudeville review show in Minot. She was asked to direct the Strategic Air Command Showcase Band. So through my connection with her, I auditioned and I got that gig, and it was really cool because we were touring all over the northern tier SAC bases, putting on shows for officers clubs and the enlisted and things like that.
Sure.
And that gave me a really good taste of like, hey, I think I kind of like this.
Yeah.
You know, you'd play at these rec centers, and there's, I mean, they're not big, but for the time, there were 400 or 500, 600 people maybe, and in this was a variety show, so we had jugglers, and we had dancers, and we had comedians, but like the band was in the thick of all of that. I might be playing a waltz 1 minute, and then a Michael Jackson tune the next minute, and
Yeah.
then a Wham tune the next minute. So really varied. We had like 8 or 10 piece band with horns and stuff. So it was a really cool show. So when we got out of the Air Force, so I met my wife there. She was also in the Air Force. We got out. We moved back to Houston, and I immediately hooked up with some bands in Houston to play. And we lived in Houston for a couple of years. One of the bands I was in, we won the Battle of the Bands in Houston, and then
Wow.
I kind of just got, I was feeling the burn, like these guys aren't, I mean, they're great musicians. In fact, some of them I'm still friends with today, 30 something years later, but I had a burn in me that I don't think they did.
Hmm.
So my wife and I were like, well, we're young, let's get the heck out of Dodge and let's go to LA. So I had a high school friend, a childhood friend who lived in LA. So we went out, we kind of visited him. We're like, well, all right, let's do this. So we just packed up and
Love that.
moved and got ourselves an apartment in Encino. And I played, uh, joined a couple of bands. Again, the whole, like you were saying at the top of the conversation. I mean, the place is just, you can't even bump into somebody who isn't, an aspiring actor or actress, musician, producer, something.
Yeah.
So even the guys I worked with in the jobs that I had were musicians. And one, again, it's kind of like what I did in Minot. One weekend I'm playing with a cover band. Another weekend I'm playing with a heavy metal band. Another weekend I'm playing with another sort of Bob Dylan-ish kind of band. So
Yeah.
just lots of great stuff. Uh, playing up and down the strip, the Roxy and the Whiskey and the Troubadour, the Gaslight, all those kinds of places that you just, that's what, like, where Van Halen and and
Yeah.
even rolling it further back, all these
That's
great
awesome.
musicians had their ghosts were on, were painted on the walls there, and the Doors played at the Troupe. I mean,
Yeah.
it's something I'm really glad that my wife was patient enough to go, well, let's give it a shot, see what happens. So it was a really great experience.
Yeah. But it can be a hard lifestyle, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, at the what sort of got me to the end of this was, I have these great memories of touring with the SAC band, the Air Force, winning the Battle of the Bands with the Outlets, playing those great haunts in LA. I studied with guys like Ralph Johnson, right? Original
Hmm.
drummer and still founding member of, or very close to founding member of Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Yeah. It's
So it
amazing.
was just a great opportunity. But I have to admit, it started to wear on me.
Hmm.
It was the industry. I met a lot of great people, great musicians, but I think towards the end, our daughter was born in '91 out there, and I think it just was. I could see the end in sight. It wasn't like I was going for that overnight record deal, or any crap like that. But just
Right.
I was. I've always been insightful enough about myself to kind of know that the end is in sight, even
Yeah.
if it was a couple of more years. I played in another couple of bands. We were still trying to build it up, but in my heart, I was kind of done by the
Hmm.
early to mid '90s, and just uh, more with the industry.
Sure.
It can definitely be tough, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm kind of glad things ended up the way they did, because who knows, I'm like, I was never into drugs or any kind of crap like that, but
Hmm.
man, I sure was around people who were.
Yeah.
And you can see where that pathway goes. And back then, right, we didn't have the internet. The only real channel of distribution we really had were the record companies, right?
Right.
And it was about who you knew, who you didn't know, where you lived. I mean, I lived in the valley, right, which was on the other side of the hill from Hollywood. So it's like, oh
Right.
my God, you're a valley dude. Even just things like
Hey, I'm a
that, where
valley
you
dude.
live. Yeah, well, where you lived made it, was important. And you're like, okay, this is just BS. Um, And I'm sure that there are a lot of players out there that just never got the right combination of timing and, hooking it up with the right people.
Yeah.
And it just in and of itself, it's a tough business. And then you sort of wrap that around the industry and all of its, sort of shortcomings. And yeah, to your point, it can be really tough.
Yeah. Well,
Um, it's not for everybody, that's for sure.
I think you actually got out at the right time, the early '90s, when that scene kind of died and gave way to
Yeah.
Seattle. So the time was
Yeah.
maybe fortuitous. So
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you'd like to hope that good music, good guys and gals will find their way, and you know, and maybe in my heart, I think of that's really true. But when you look out at what's really happening or was happening on the music scene, that wasn't really always true.
right.
Some of the best players never even got a shot,
Yeah.
because it was about connections, often more so than, like, when you think of Spirit of the Radio by Rush, what's that song
Mhm.
really about, right? Glittering prizes, and then there's compromises,
Yeah.
shatters the illusion of integrity. And I totally get that.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. I love that song, by the way. I'm a huge
Yeah,
Rush fan.
yeah,
So,
yeah, that's a
so,
great song. Yeah.
so you had an opportunity to have so many experiences before you entered the insights industry. I'm wondering if there are any lessons or um, things you learned along the way that you've brought with you as you've approached this career.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think for me, music and insights kind of bear a remarkable level of resemblance to each other,
Hmm.
right? I think to get good at it, they both require a level of tenacity, curiosity, practice, um, you know, discovery, because you know music tells a story, and so should our jobs, so should our insights, right?
Hmm.
I think I've always had a bit of a knack for finding that gold. I think, but just with experience, you learn story structure, right? But that's just like a song. Songs tell a story, and so should, our music. And I think there's a lot of overlap. You have an opening and a beginning, you have bridges, you have transitions, you have breaks, you have
Hmm.
endings, right? So there's a bit of uh, sort of overlap or correlation, I think, between the two.
Sure.
But I think underneath it, um, this whole idea of constantly digging, constantly improving, practicing, having patience, but underneath that is just this desire to understand
Hmm.
what is driving these things. And I did the same thing. Like whenever I was working on my sticking, it'd be like, well, why is my left hand doing this crazy thing that I don't want it to do? So using your own insights to improve, through practice, and so I think it's all of those traits are applicable. Uh, and I think a lot of the experiences, I wasn't born with the patience gene, so I think I've had to use a lot of that, to kind of help me today. I do think you draw on, and even in think of this science sort of, pathway that I talked about earlier.
Hmm.
I've actually used that concept to explain, like, okay, Cargill's this big company, you know, just crazy complexity. And people say, well, if a person has a brand experience in one area, how does that impact, or what are they thinking about? I'm like, okay, think about a picture. See this beautiful painting by Monet or a Picasso. But what happens when you zero in and you keep getting closer and closer and closer to that picture? So close you use a microscope to look at a paint pixel. You lose the picture, you lose the beauty of that painting, right? But in nature, there's a thing called a fractal that
Yep.
doesn't do that. The more and more you get in closer to that fractal, you continue to see the beauty. So I said, regardless of my mind, regardless of what that touch point is within the brand, they should have that same beautiful view of that picture. So if we're seeing sort of depressions in advocacy or something like that, I don't want to hear excuses that, well, they're getting that from some other part of the brand. I was like, I don't really care. It's You still should be able to um, kind of have that same natural beauty, and sometimes I draw on some of my own science, experiences, and sometimes even my own music experiences to sort of provide analogies or anchors for people to understand insights, and that part's kind of neat too.
Sure, sure. No, I love that analogy actually of the fractals. So sticking with the Cargill topic real quickly, you mentioned, I mean, it's a huge global organization, and you've been there for a few years now, and I'm wondering, what are some of the maybe challenges or opportunities you see on the insight side, either now or in the future?
Yeah. I think more broadly speaking, you know, there's probably no surprise, right, that this whole big data, AI, machine learning thing is coming into play. That's where a lot of the investment is being made in our space. And um, you know, for me, the concept that people are going to continue taking surveys on a computer kind of seems to be in the autumn of its existence. We're seeing companies out there that are doing pulse surveys on mobile. Of course, there's AI applications, agile, quick. That said, I still think qualitative is going to be important because just like you and I right now, it's very difficult to have this kind of conversation with a machine, right?
Right.
It's personal interactions that I think are going to still be important to provide richness and depth. But I do think that there's probably going to come a time when like a driver analysis is done through causal effects via AI, where I don't have to go do a survey anymore. In
Mhm.
fact, I'm actually piloting that kind of study right now. Um, but so I do think qual is going to continue to be extremely important. It's just difficult to replace these face-to-face interactions. But when it does come to quant, I'm just not sure how much longer sort of collecting this data. So we may think of, and I'm using air quotes, the old fashioned way. Just don't know how long it's going to last, right? We've seen
Sure.
plummeting participation rates at the same time, exponentially increasing incentive rates, just trying to get people to take a damn survey, right? So
Mhm.
and we have terrific panel partners. They all do great work, but the overall longevity of this, is in question to me. So then I say, okay, well, then what could take its place? What kind of tools can we use? So, I mean, I'm doing a ton of, what we might think of as traditional brand, and reputation tracking types of work, um, kind of the old fashioned way, if you will, through panels. But I'm also piloting an AI machine learning project around understanding latent factors and drivers that we may not be thinking of, and these linkages we may be thinking of or not thinking of,
Mhm.
and then maybe applying that to our customer engagement data, our Salesforce data, our
Right.
sales enablement data, bringing in bigger chunks of and disparate data that we could just never do. Because AI is going to look at these combinations and billions of them in minutes, right? Versus
Mhm.
you and I could do them by hand. We could do 3 an hour, or something. So we can get to some solutions much, more quickly.
Sure.
And I'm also piloting a kind of a pulse a 3-question, real quick pulse survey on the mobile platforms
Mhm.
among consumers to just sort of get some quick, which way is the wind blowing on some message concepts, for example. So
Mhm.
we're definitely, kind of trying to, um, test the waters when it comes to some of these more agile or more advanced topics. Because
It's
I do think at some point, some of these sort of traditional methods of data collection are going to ultimately, you know, go to the dustbin. And maybe they should, you know,
yeah, yeah.
it's just
Well,
evolution.
right. Well, knowing you, I'm not surprised to hear that you're trying lots of different things and pushing the envelope where you can. Um,
Yeah, even an old dog like me can learn new tricks. So, yeah, no.
Absolutely. So So tell me about any other kind of podcasts or books or other media that you're drawing inspiration from both personally or professionally.
Yeah, well, of course, you've probably been able to surmise that I love science.
Hmm.
So literally anything related to that. My Facebook feed, I think I have 30 or 40 different science pages from quantum is weird to physics is weird to, you can name it. But I think I've got to narrow these down to a couple. And I think one of them, you and I may have talked about before, was Brief History of Time
Yeah.
by Stephen Hawking.
Hmm.
It's a great way to kind of understand cosmology and what's really happening out there in the universe in a sort of a layman's way. It's as it doesn't it, Stephen doesn't go into depth about um, the theory of relativity. If you want to go read that, it's great. I think anyone who really wants to start to understand the weirdness of the universe we live in,
Hmm.
the best place to start is by reading Einstein's transcripts of his theory of relativity, because even not the math, but just the concepts and the thought experiment that he went through to get there. But Brief History of Time does a really good job of kind of explaining it more in layman's terms.
Yep.
There's another one by Werner Heisenberg that I love called Physics and Philosophy,
Yep. I
where
have that too.
it's the concepts. Yeah, again, just kind of the these uncertainty principles and all of these different quantum issues that. And again, it's really a lot of it is just about how you embrace what you see in reality with what's really going on at the quantum level. The two just don't jive, right? You're just like,
Yeah.
what the hell is going on here? It's just some really cool ways to think about the worlds around us. But then, of course, there always has to be one here for us drummers. Um,
Thank you.
there's a great book called Sympathy for the Drummer: Why Charlie Watts Matters. It's by Mike Edison, and it's just a blast to read because Mike sort of kind of brings about some of the very colorful ways to think about rock and roll and particularly about the drummer's point of view.
Mhm.
And I think you and I have kind of talked about this, but there was a quote. I'll just give you a little snippet. There was a quote from Charlie Watts when he was asked, like, what is a rock drummer? And he's
Mhm.
like, what the fuck's a rock drummer? So this whole book is about, um, the sort of and why and what and the under the subtitle of this is why Charlie Watts matters, is because it brings about the personality and the groove and the function, um, and there's so much energy there. There's so much, um, and there are going to be drummers from a technical perspective that could blow Charlie Watts away, right? Probably
Yep.
you and me both. But it's unmistakable, just like Phil Rudd from AC/DC, where you have these dirty, grungy, deep grooves that just make your butt bounce. And the importance of that in rock and roll, right?
Mhm.
It's one thing to be as steady as a tabletop. I'm all in for meter and timing and things like this. But when you can make a person's butt bounce, and you're the drummer and you're the one responsible for that, it kind of encapsulate kind of what's up with rock and roll drummers, or at least with rock and roll at its very core. So
Yeah.
this book is really kind of a fun read. So
Cool.
I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So, cool stuff. You know what's coming now, Randy. Um, so hopefully you
Sure,
had a chance
sure.
to think about it, right? So you're stranded on the desert island. You've got three albums of your choice at your disposal for the end of your days, but only those three. What are
Yeah. So this one was tough. All the others were pretty easy. This one was tough. The you know interestingly enough, while I've talked about Rush and Neil Peart and things, he was a huge influence on my playing. Um, when it, I don't want my album choice to think about my drummer choice, because if it was drummers, it'd be Bonham, it'd be Peart, it would be Steve Smith. I mean, those guys would be on the island with me, till the end of my days.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about the albums, I have to bring in, all of the other music, the lyrics and the melodies and things like this. I'm a very lyrical drummer and a very melodical drummer, I think. So I've got where I landed was a couple of albums by Styx. I know people might be groaning, but I'm not talking about Babe and Too Much Time on My Hands and stuff. Good songs, fine. But you need to go listen to Castle Walls and some of the songs off Pieces of Eight. Just some really great musicianship there. A lot of great melodies, great guitar work. So I landed on Grand Illusion and Pieces of Eight as the two albums from Styx. I'm gonna go down the funnel here. Another one, again, I talked about the grungy groove work of Phil Rudd and AC/DC. It's got to be Back in Black.
Nice.
Every single time I hear that album, anything off that album, windows are down, sunroof is open, volume is at full blast, and it's just great stuff. And again, talking about making your butt bounce, right? There's some great stuff on that album. But then you swing to the other end. I'm a huge Danny Seraphim fan in Chicago. So their greatest hits 1 and 2, just almost every song on that album has, all of those great horn parts, great guitar work, vocals, the melodies. Danny's drumming is great. So that's really 4. And then down on my 5th one, and I get to the 3, but the 5th one was Sign of the Times by Prince.
Yes.
Another double album. Just, dude, if you just, guys and gals out there listening, if you've never heard that album, put it on. It is still just as, it came out in the late 80s. It's timeless. It's still just as relevant today. When he's talking about, just 9 months ago, his cousin was smoking reefer for the very first time, and 9 months later he's doing horse. He's talking about, there's just some great social commentary lyrics in that album. So, all right, that's the 5.
Okay.
All right, so I think I've got to go with, I've probably got to go with Grand Illusion from Styx.
Okay.
Probably Back in Black with AC/DC. And because I've got my groove and my grunge and those albums and the lyrics, as much as I'd love to have Prince on the island, I got to go with the third one's got to be Chicago, because it's going to round out the styles. And, when you're in the mood for some horns and some jazz, you listen to Chicago. If you're in the mood for a little bit of Hell's Bells, you got to listen to some AC/DC.
Very nice. Well, I noticed
good stuff there.
I noticed you didn't say Slayer, but you're still okay in my book, Randy.
Well, I mean, again, a lot of great heavy metal drumming out there for sure in those guys. Iron Maiden, Slayer, Megadeth, Metallica, huge Lars Ulrich friend, but when you think about albums, you know what I mean? And you think that's, again, if I could have the drummers, I'd love to have Lars on the album or on the island with me, but yeah, really good stuff.
All right, cool. Well, Randy, this has been a wonderful chat as always. I really appreciate your time, sharing your insights and talking a little bit of drums here today on the Rock and Roll Research Podcast.
You betcha.
So I love that. So thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, my pleasure, Matt. Take care, and looking forward to hearing and seeing more of the great podcasts and the great drummers and musicians that you have on your show. Good stuff.
Absolutely. Rock and roll, Randy.
Take care, man. All right. Be safe.
See ya.